Welcome to the only place where real, raw, and vulnerable conversations happen with IFBB Bikini Pros to give you an inside look at their struggles, strategies, mindset, passions, and all of life beyond the stage. This podcast is made to inspire, motivate, and remind competitors and the average gym goer that even the most extreme lifestyles and elite athletes have their ups and downs. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm your host, Celeste Rains-Turk, and now it's time for the Confessions of a Bikini Pro podcast. Today we'll be speaking with the 2021 overall winner of the NPC Junior USA Championships, who has been competing since 2015 and worked as a photographer and videographer in LA before pursuing nursing school this year, while supporting others in their fitness and competition journeys as a fitness prep and posing coach. After turning pro, she went on to do 3 pro shows and has since been taking her time to come back even better. Welcome to the show, Cory Hageman. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Awesome. So happy to have you on. And I wanted to give listeners some perspective because listeners know about the events that I do, or some do, and the Build More Than Just a Body events. And you were the videographer and photographer of the very first one. And meeting you there was really awesome. You were so sweet and you did an incredible job, the best job that's ever been done. And just watching your journey since then has been such a pleasure and motivation for me. And then seeing you at USA's, and then you continued on and you won the overall, and then you're just making this splash in the pro league, stirred up, a lot of eyes on you, that's for sure. And I've been looking forward to having you on. I know so many listeners have been dying to hear from you. So I'm just really happy that we made this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on and, being patient. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's wild how, just different paths we connect and we meet each other at different points in our lives. And, here we are, it's almost 3 years later, and, under completely different circumstances, our paths are crossed again. And, I'm excited.
Thank you. Yes. And before we get into everything, I always like to ask if there's something you do or think about right before your heel hits the stage.
Yes, that is a amazing question. So that moment, before you're actually on stage, not when you're off to the side where you can see the judges and you already have it all turned on, right before you go up the stairs, I have found that this is, been a consistent pattern for me. I start to think about prep. I start to think about, everything, every time that I had even like an itch to take a shortcut, anytime that I, thought not necessarily about giving up, but was like, in this, this zone of like self-doubt where I'm like, oh, can I actually do this? And before I get on stage, I've made it a goal of mine to know how I'm going to feel. And when I start to think about that, I'm like, well, I want that moment. I want to be in control of it. I want to know before I get on stage that there was nothing more I could have done. There were no areas that I knowingly, didn't maximize, or, there were no times where I wanted to give up, that I was like, okay, I'll just I'll skip a little cardio, I'll eat a little more food. And I think that started, in my first year, my first show back in 2020, I just, when I started prep, I was like, okay, my mindset, that has got to be strong. And I really feel like right before you hit the stage, everything kind of comes back to you and you're like, wait, is there more I could have done? And I've been telling myself for a while, hey, no, I want to be able to get on stage and know there was nothing else I could have done. This is my very best at this moment in time, regardless of circumstance. And yeah, luckily I've been able to get on stage knowing, hey, this is my best. And honestly, that in itself takes away a lot of those pre-show nerves, a lot of that, I don't know, anxiety, a lot of that doubt, from, actually competing.
Yes, I really like that too, because to reflect on your journey and recognize where you proved yourself wrong or proved yourself right gives you confidence, and it can ease any doubt that you might have before stepping on stage, because you identify ways you've already overcome doubt in the past.
Absolutely. How you said that was much more clear, but yes,
Succinct.
that is exactly what it is. It inspires confidence, and I think the more often you can do that and do it objectively, I I think the better off you're going to be, in
Mm.
taming those nerves.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to go through your pro experience first and then kind of work backwards from there. And when you won your pro card, you had about 5 months, and correct me anytime I'm wrong about the info, but you had like 5 months between USAs and junior USAs. So what did you work on between those two shows?
Okay. So my main critique for myself after my 2020 season, after my national shows and I did a regional show, my main thing that I felt like I really hadn't, you know, excelled at was my conditioning. And, I even though it was the leanest I had been, I knew that it wasn't where it needed to be. And I remember after USA's, I nationals, a month before USA's, I was happy with my look. I was blown away that I got third, and I was really close to turning pro then because it was my first national show, and it it was a really big milestone for me after being off stage for 4.5 years. And even though I was really happy with that, I could look at pictures and be like, okay, well, this is the leanest I've ever been, but I know to be competitive, to be an IFBB bikini pro, I am not there. I don't have that conditioning. And, I went into USA's, I came in tighter, but I also lost muscle. So, I mean, the look itself, I didn't place as well. I didn't love the look I had. And, going into my 2021 season, I was like, okay, you know, I've never pushed myself. I've never taken myself to where I need to be to have that conditioning that is, I just want to say like pro conditioning. So, I communicated with Shane, my coach at the time. I told him I want to do what it takes. I want to go there, go to that place. And I've never been there, but I feel really confident that, with the right guidance and, you know, the right, uh, the right headspace, I think I can do this. And I think I can get leaner than I've ever gotten. So, that was my number one priority going into junior USA's, getting ready for that national show where I did earn my pro card. And yeah, you're spot on with the timeline. I mean, we started prep at the end of January, so I had about a month. I don't even want to say off because quite honestly, I know the number of untracked meals I had between USA's in 2020 and the start of prep. I mean, it was like, honestly, dude, it was like 2 or 3,
Yeah,
and
I imagine.
every other day I was tracking my macros, I was adherent, I still was, like, tapering down cardio, but, like, I was very much still on prep, just with
Mhm.
the focus of, like, "Okay, you're gonna be starting prep soon, so, like, don't do anything that's gonna cause you to have more makeup work." And, yeah, we started prep, and, we actually didn't start dieting. Shane had me increase food pretty significantly, which, I want to mention this too. I think it's really important for listeners. Whenever you're working with a new coach, in this time period I'm referring to, I had switched from working with one of my closest friends, Andrew Walker, and I coached by him. I switched from working with him to working with Shane. And, one thing I really really wanted to do and I wanted to execute correctly, I didn't want to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out with a new coach. I wanted to listen to what he wanted me to do. I wanted to follow it to a T. And I didn't want to be like, okay, I'm going to listen to half of what he says, but secretly I'm going to do my own thing when I feel like, maybe it's not spot on. And I do see that a lot. I hear it a lot with, usually after the fact, people are like, yeah, but I didn't follow his plan or I didn't follow her plan. And I
Mhm.
think that ultimately, like, whether you agree with everything a coach has you do, yes, you should think for yourself and you should have very firm boundaries. But if you're choosing to work with a coach and you've done, the legwork on, their background, you should follow what they say so that at the end of the prep, 100%, that like what they had you do either was the right thing, or, you can measure, you can objectively say, hey, like this was helpful, or it wasn't, hey, it wasn't the best way. Um, so I want to explain that just for viewers to know, like, hey,
Mhm.
when I started working with Shane, I thought we were starting prep into January. Um, and even though he said, we're starting prep, there was about 6 weeks before we actually pulled calories back down. And even though during those first 6 weeks of prep, air quotes, my calories were very high. So was my cardio though. And it resulted in originally what was supposed to be a 4 month prep, about 20 weeks, give or take. Um, it shortened that to closer to like 10 weeks. And um, I think that's really important for people to look at, because I don't want anyone to think, oh, hey, like she got ready for this show, she got this lean, looked this way, and it took her 5 months. It didn't take me 5 months. And, I mean, I think it was a really good learning lesson. But yeah, going into junior USA's, I mean, I was about 6 weeks out. And for listeners who don't know, my boyfriend Patrick, he's heavily involved in my competing career. He is as versed, if not more versed, than most bikini coaches, not just on the division, but on fat loss, on competition prep, on training programming. And about 6 weeks out, we were both like, I am not ready. Like, I'm not even close to ready. I've got a lot of weight to lose. And I kept telling him, Patrick does a really good job at not, sideline coaching. And even at the time, he was like, hey, like, you need to follow exactly what Shane says. You need to do what he says, because otherwise, whatever the result is, you're not going to know if it was something if you were doing other stuff on
Mhm.
the side, you're not going to know how much that actually impacted the final product, the final result. So 6 weeks out, we're both looking at me. We're like, okay, well, I'm not even as lean as I was going into my national shows. I'm, like 137, I think, which I compete like 125. So I'm like, damn, dude, like this is gonna be steep. And I communicated all this to Shane. And it was about that time where we took calories really low and we increased cardio. And this was not him saying, hey, you have to do this. This was him saying, to get to where you need to be, you're not there and you might not be ready. And me saying, okay, what do I need to do? Um, I don't think I have the conditioning even currently, and I don't think I'm going to have it in time. So let's push. And
Mhm.
one of the things that was really, really important to me working with Shane, for this show specifically, was I didn't want to give him any reason to um, to let up on the gas and to
Mhm.
be afraid to diet me, because previously working with Andrew, who's a very close friend of mine, I mean, we've talked about this. When you work with someone who loves you, who cares about you, and you have more than a coach and client relationship, it does become difficult to want to push your athlete, to want to take them to that place that they need to go for that conditioning. it becomes difficult because you know how bad they feel. I mean, Andrew, he would text me and be like, "Hey, when's your chemistry test?" And he would use things that, you know, were aspects of my life that he knew about because he's a friend, and it would make it difficult. And Andrew did an amazing job coaching me. So I mean, I don't want to misconstrue that, but you know, when I when I was working with Shane, I really didn't want to give him any reason to think I couldn't handle the diet or I couldn't handle what I needed to do to bring the look we wanted to bring.
Amazing. And I think that speaks to your earlier point about how you had a shift where you're like, I'm ready to push it to that limit, to take it to that place of conditioning I've never been before. And your timeline wasn't working out exactly how you guys had expected, which then granted the opportunity to be pushed to that place at a maybe more accelerated rate, which you share that you took responsibility for that decision. You said that's what you want to do. You signed up for it. You committed to it. There was nothing shared that would have made your coach pull off the gas, and that could have prevented you from getting where you wanted to go. You've always been very open about stage weight, measurements, things of that nature. So I want to speak a little bit analytically this way. What did you have to do cardio wise and food wise that was different than what you had done previously to get to the level of conditioning that was required?
So in 2020, the lowest my calories got for any longer than, I mean, sure, there were a couple days in during like peak week where I went down to like 1100 or went down to 1000. Um, that was never sustained though. My calories in 2020 for those national shows um, were 14, 1300 maybe. I mean, they're low relatively. They're not that low. And I didn't know that they weren't that low until 2021, where I mean, we were we were dropping calories pretty much every week for about 4 weeks. And then when I hit April, about 6 weeks out, I was at 1400 already for a few weeks. And cardio was at that 90-minute mark. And that was when, I communicated a little. I want to say this was the point, this was like the turning point where I told Shane, I I look the leanest I've ever been. This will not be acceptable if I get on stage like this, even if I do keep losing some weight. So I want to push. And he's like, okay, well, like, and every time, like, we got to this point, which only happened a couple of times, Shane was really communicative. Hey, I need you to tell me if this is too much. I need you to tell me if and eventually, I mean, what he ended up saying when I saw him like at the show, he's like, my doubt was never that mentally you couldn't handle it. It was that, oh, so, I'm so sorry. My dishwasher is yelling at us. Um, his doubt was never that mentally I couldn't hack it. It was more, I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to be doing cardio and pass out and fall off the treadmill. And I know that probably sounds pretty dramatic, but I I could see where, athletes, if you're someone who is more stubborn and just very focused on an outcome, you might not see the potential risk behind how you're approaching extreme fat loss. And during that time, I mean, I was doing 2 hours of cardio. My calories, they were about 1100, I want to say. And I mean, the last couple weeks they went a little bit lower, but after junior USA's, it was still there was still an understanding that, hey, I my conditioning was acceptable at junior USA's for my standard, for Shane's standard. It wasn't acceptable for the pro stage. It wasn't acceptable for what I wanted to happen at my pro debut. how I wanted to place, how I wanted to look. And that was something that, again, like after junior essays, we discussed, and I said, like, I know I can do more. I know it's not going to be easy, but I really want to capitalize on the momentum we have. I really want to take advantage of how lean I am right now and the trajectory, what we can do with this momentum. So, I stayed in that deficit. Um, I had some food after junior USAs, but I mean nothing wild. And I mean, literally Sunday, the day after, Patrick and we had like a breakfast where we, ate till I ate till I was satisfied, and we
Mhm.
had like a cookie afterwards. But then we're like, okay, like flying home, gotta get back on it. And cardio, we reduced down to 90 minutes, which sounds insane, but that was a breath of fresh air,
Is
coming
this
from
per
2 hours.
day or is that like in one session?
Uh, n- that's per day. Yeah. So
Okay.
it was 2 hours going into junior USAs, which I would break up. I would do 60, 70, at most like 75 minutes in the morning, 15% incline, 3 miles an hour, which if you've ever done that
Yeah.
is not less.
No.
And I don't say any of this to like, it's not a flex. Like, here's the thing. I don't want people to hear this and be like, oh, that's what I need to do. Like
Right.
that's the formula. It's absolutely not. It is not the way to do it. It works because starvation diets work. If you followed my prep though, you know that I got injured, and I was put into a position like I couldn't train, and because of the deficit I was in and the amount of time I had been dieting, I mean, like, you can't do that aimlessly. There are consequences, and whether you decide during prep, hey, we're going to make adjustments so it's not a disaster later, whether you do that or not, which I did not do that, you pay for it at some point. And I mean, I did. I ended up paying for it. And yeah, I think it's really important, like, to preface that with like,
Yes.
this is not what I'd recommend. I will not be dieting that way ever again. And I think there are better ways to go about getting that condition. And, hopefully this year, my goal is to be able to show other athletes who do want to achieve that conditioning, you can do so in a way that doesn't result in like excessive muscle loss, in getting injured, or in
Mm.
dropping 10 pounds in like 3-4 weeks. Like that's ridiculous. There are better ways to do it.
What better ways are there? I want to hear what you have in mind.
So this year I am coaching myself, and I'm really excited to be doing this because I don't feel like I've had the formal education and the understanding, previous preps when I have coached myself. I also during previous preps, I didn't have any idea what it would take or what it would look like to get truly like conditioned, to get truly stage lean. So this year, I'm not waiting until the last 8 weeks to be like, hey, like, now I've got to turn up the heat. We've got to crank it out, and we've got to, do whatever it takes to meet this show deadline. I am 4 weeks in, and I'm exactly the same weight I was at the end of March last year. So last year, what I did in a short amount of time, I'm at that point. But rather than having 6 weeks to see out a prep, I have a timeline. I have 12, 16 weeks if needed that accommodate for fat loss that is tracked, that is objective, that doesn't, that's scientifically at the rate that I'm planning to lose fat, that I've been losing fat. I shouldn't lose as much muscle. I shouldn't have
Mm.
to get up to 2 hours, 120 minutes cardio at level 15 on on a treadmill. And I think the key, like the really big thing that like makes that possible is starting out prep and saying, hey, I have a weekly target of how much fat I need to lose. I break that down into, a reasonable amount, over the course of a prep and then per week, and then what that looks like in terms of total weight loss. Now, the deficit, I mean, I've been I've been averaging about 1,500 calories for 4 weeks now, coming down from 2,000, which was what I ended my off season at. It sounds low. Yeah. And I mean, like, sure, I'm feeling a little hungry, but I'm doing 30 minutes of cardio. I'm hitting, 10, 11,000 steps a day. I'm training 4 days a week. I'm setting up my prep, not just to accommodate for, the look I want, but my prep has the safeties built in where, hey, like I shouldn't have issues with recovery from training. I should be able to maintain my training volume. I shouldn't get to the point where I'm doing 25,000 steps a day just to get my cardio in. And I think that really does come down to like pre-prep, having a plan and being realistic about, okay, well, that might mean you start your prep and you hit a deficit a little hard. And this is actually this is a quote from my mentor John Jewett, who's actually going to be my second eye for this prep. He's, for listeners who don't know, he's 212 Olympian, I think 5-time Olympian. Him and his wife Renee, they both. Well, let me back up. He puts out an immense amount of information for athletes on how to navigate the sport, but not just in season, they're off season as well. And he coaches himself. He coaches his wife Renee, and he's someone who, I aspire to coach myself the way he does, because I mean he has a reputation with showing up to multiple shows a year, showing up every show, one of the leanest guys on stage. And he does so not by there's no magic, there's no secret. It's, hey, I have a really good dietary adherence. I account for my variables and I'm not afraid to diet myself. And you know, tuning into his journey and getting to see how he goes about prep and the kind of information that he puts out there, it's really inspired me to want to do the same for myself, because I believe I can. And just circling back to the question, I think that's going to make a really big difference this year, having a timeline. And the thing John is a big fan of is you can't you you can always start your prep off and lose the fat, during those initial few weeks, lose the fat during those that first month and a half. You can always add food back in later once you're conditioned. You can always decrease cardio and adjust. You can never go back in time and take food out and decide to diet harder. And I think that's an error that I've made in previous preps. I think it's something that a lot of coaches make, a lot of people make. It's a mistake a lot of people make, that they'll approach those first 4 to 6 weeks and they'll be like, yeah, we're just going to dip our toe in. We're just going to go into a small deficit. You're not even going to realize you're in prep. And while I understand that approach, what you run into, what I ran into last year is then you get to the last 6 to 8 weeks, and whether you want to or not, you're forced to accommodate for however much fat you have to lose to hopefully get in shape. And usually it's a rushed process. And anyone who is notorious for coming in really conditioned, they never do it that way. They never get on stage, like just racing to the finish line, racing to that look that, that can be competitive. So, very long-winded, but I
No,
think
I
that
love that.
I think I may have touched on the answer there.
You did. No, I really appreciate you breaking down your experiences and how that's inspiring your future intentions, or maybe I should say your current intentions and approach. And this reminds me of something that you had mentioned in an interview in the past. It was on like a news article in 2015 that I read because I did my research. And um, you had said to them that you wanted to take a flexible dieting approach and coach yourself to the stage, prioritize health, and show people that you can remain healthy and compete. And it sounds like you have learned so much along your journey and so much along the way that you've now found new processes. And something I think is really important to highlight here, even beyond the specifics, is the fact that the way you're going about it is willingness to evolve. And I think sometimes athletes can get stuck in not being willing to change their process or evolve or learn from their experiences. And instead, will sometimes basically be like, no, I'm never going to compete again. And I know you had that experience. I had that experience too. So I'm not throwing shade or anything. Like I definitely was like a jaded competitor for sure. And I remember in 2018, you'd been reflecting on your competing journey, and you shared that you didn't think competing was best for you anymore, even though when you started it, it felt like it was. And I was just hoping you could open up more about when you felt stepping away from competing was best for you and what's changed to make you not just want to come back to it and go to the lengths that you have, right? Like being willing to say, I'll do whatever it takes, to now modifying your approach to continuously meet feedback in a way that it sounds like would sustain you for a longer period of time.
That's a great question. I know the article you're talking about. I think I did that when I was at A&M. So I was 18 or 19, and yeah, it was a completely different Cory, but not completely different, but a very, very young, very naive Cory. um, so yeah, let me try to answer that. My my biggest hang up and I guess I'll summarize this for any listeners who don't know. I started competing in 2015. I had been tracking macros. I'd been, you know, relatively like flexible dieting already. I started tracking macros in 2010. So at this point, it's been about 13 years. And I, um, I came across Lane Norton in college, and he was one of the only big voices in fitness who I felt was offering, just like really solid information about how fat loss works. And his, his mission was, it just seemed so simple at the time, teaching newer athletes, hey, like you can do a bro diet, you can do flexible diet, you can be restrictive with food, but like the bottom line is like there aren't any studies to support that fat loss occurs differently when you have when you have a very restricted food selection, foods you eat, versus when you have some variety in your foods. Coining the term flexible dieting, and that's under the criteria that calories are accounted for in both scenarios. And I became fascinated with this, and I started to educate myself more about like, hey, like, okay, well, if there's the way that I saw coaches were doing it back then, with very restrictive diets, just 4 or 5 foods on a meal plan. If that's the standard for how you get shredded, how you get to really low body fats. However, I see this person, I see Lane, offering a lot of data to support the opposite. not to support eating like an asshole, eating like just candy and a bunch of random stuff, but to support, hey, like you can do so, and you can have some control over your food selection and still get just as lean if calories are accounted for. I saw that as a challenge to, for myself to get on stage, through this. At the time, it was a very taboo approach to contest prep, but I believed in it, and I wanted to show others, hey, like, what, regardless of what you've been told, this is a very sustainable and health oriented approach in a very extreme sport, that the alternative is not sustainable. The alternative is not healthy in any means by anyone's definitions. Um, and it motivated me to get on stage, and I did so. I competed twice. My first season, I did well, and then I took a little time off. Maybe built a little muscle. Competed two more times, and the third and fourth time I competed in a different organization because I felt like I felt like at the time I really wasn't able to get myself as conditioned as I needed to. I wasn't able to take myself to that place. And, granted, I was coaching myself. So, I mean, I'm sure with the right education, the right guidance, maybe I could have, but at the time I didn't believe in myself. And, I wrapped up my second season of competing, and I was like, well, I have a job opportunity. I'm finishing up school. I maybe should reconsider my priorities, because I don't I don't think I have what it takes to be, you know, a, a top athlete, or even to turn pro in the IFBB. So, I kind of just made peace with that, and I told myself, this is okay, but don't keep lying to yourself and telling yourself like, oh, you're gonna get on stage and you're gonna win. And I just like developed this idea. And one of my favorite quotes is from Jim Quick. It's if you fight hard enough for your limits, you get to keep them.
Mhm.
And at the time, I fought really hard for that belief that, hey, I don't have what it takes. And I kind of buried that belief for a long time. I just put it to the side, and whenever I I should mention, in my fourth show, I earned my pro card in a different organization, a much less
Mm.
competitive organization. And granted, I'm proud of it. Yeah, I think that's the right way to feel, but I was rewarded for a physique that I personally don't think, even at the time, would have won an overall at a local show in the MPC.
Mhm.
And I want to be honest, that like, getting rewarded for that, when there are people who look better for you, when look better than you, when there are people who've done more, worked harder, it doesn't sit well. And I don't
Mhm.
think I think it, for a long time, it was kind of eating away at me. It kind of led me to develop this like chip on my shoulder about, oh well, I'm a pro in a smaller organization. I'm a pro in a not the IFBB. And it wasn't until Junior USA's, I after after Patrick and I left the venue, we were on our way to we're on our way to a restaurant and going to have a meal, and we're both like just riding this high. And he turns to me before we get out of the car, and he's like, you have lived the last 4 or 5 years telling yourself you're not good enough, and you can't do what you just did. You've convinced yourself that, hey, like, what you did was great, but this is like this accomplishment, this thing that you just did today, you just snuffed that belief that you don't get to have that anymore. You just got rid of it. And Patrick saying that, we had never talked about it, which was the crazy thing. He had never said that to me. We never had a discussion because for whatever reason, maybe he knew it was such a sensitive subject. Maybe he knew like it actually like ate away at me that much that I just told myself like, no, you're not good enough. And when he told me that after Junior USA's, like oh my gosh, dude, I got so emotional. I was like, yeah, you're right. Like I want to remember what this feels like to prove myself wrong. And I want to take every belief that I have about myself that I've just like hammered home and been like, this is, I've treated it like it's fact. And I want to challenge that. I don't want to wait another 5 years to realize like, hey, you set this, like you set this limit for yourself. No one else did. You were the only thing standing in your way. So that was a big shift for me, from how I used to feel about competing. And hopefully an explanation there as far as,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, I know you had asked, I think you had asked a second part to that question. If you could just help me get back onto answering that. I think that answers the first part though.
Yeah, no, I honestly think you answered both, because I was curious about like when you decided, well, maybe you didn't answer this completely, but when did you decide that competing wasn't best for you anymore? And actually, to add to that, well, no, let's just start there. When did you decide it wasn't best for you anymore?
So in 2016, after I competed in my fourth show, when I earned my pro card in the NSL, I yeah, that show, I mean, I wasn't I didn't love the look I brought. I got rewarded for it. And I was in my last year of college. I was moving to Virginia in the next couple months, and I was like, man, like I don't I don't think this is like mentally healthy for me. I can't I don't want to feel this way again. I don't want to compete as a pro in this organization. I don't want to get off stage and feel this way again. So I think that was when I decided, no, I think I need to um pump the brakes on this.
And you had made a lot of strides to work on your mentality, not just in overcoming the limits you created, but also in your relationship with food and training for you. For a while, you even went into powerlifting, and you started to honor your own personal needs and goals through this period of time where you weren't working to step on stage. How did that time influence your recent prep experience, like coming back to the stage after having worked on your food relationship and training for yourself and honoring your needs and goals?
That's a great question. So I during that time off, I mean, I think I stayed around the 140s, 145 range. I even got a little bit heavier than that. And having been someone who's pretty much always dieted, and had started dieting when I was 13,
Mhm.
it was it was a part of my journey, my experience, that really allowed me to see, you know, no one respects me. I don't respect me more when I'm smaller, when I'm a healthy body fat, or when I'm a little heavier. And I developed that mindset because honestly, I realized hey, like for so long, you have just associated your value with being 125, even 130. You've associated that like people like you more, you like you more, and you have something more to offer when you are leaner, when you are low body fat. And I think there was a pretty big period where I just I enjoyed food, and I don't want this to be convoluted, because I how I was eating when I was my heaviest was not healthy. It's not that the body fat I was at, or even like the weight, it's not so much associated there. It was the behavior around eating was not one that I would recommend, that I would say is representative of someone who is healthy. But I think it was an important part of me understanding, hey, now you've established what unhealthy looks like, and it has nothing to do with getting on stage. It has nothing to do with trying to get smaller. Now you know what it looks like when you're unhealthy, going the opposite direction, and you have a reference point to say, hey, in the future, when you start getting to this point where your behavior is just a little disordered, you you need to be accountable for it. You need to be able to say, hey, like, this is not how I want to live. This isn't how I want to approach, any kind of nutrition, any kind of diet. And um I think that was an important lesson for myself. I think it was an important time period for me to understand, like, you don't all I had known was when I got leaner, when I got smaller, like in college and, my early 20s, like I had always associated that with being unhealthy. But now I was able to see, okay, there's another side to this that is also unhealthy. And there are ways to improve your relationship with food here. And, when I started just enjoying training and, living the lifestyle of, okay, well, let's figure out how to get to a body composition that you're happy with. Maybe that's not 125, maybe that's not 145, maybe that's somewhere in between. And when I started to approach, finding a body composition that I felt healthy at, where I could still perform, but I also felt confident at, I felt secure at, um, I feel like it helped straighten me out as far as like what expectations I have for myself, surrounding my body composition.
Yeah, it's like you got to see two different perspectives, whereas before you only saw one. And so it kind of led you to the other. And then you were able to see that and then start to establish more of a middle ground where you were flexible, but also more intentional, it sounds like, and more respectful of your body too. And prep can be interesting. Like you were saying earlier, you can push yourself, you can get into that mindset of wanting to push really hard. And you had this experience of ended up being injured, not being able to train for a while. And a few people had asked and inquired about how you addressed those injuries and made modifications for the way you looked on stage and for strength and rehab purposes.
So my injury, I injured myself about 2.5 weeks after my pro debut, and I had already committed to two more shows that year. Um, I injured myself about 2.5, 3 weeks out from that first show, that next show I had. Um, I I pulled my serratus, and sounds wild, but I think it was from being as lean as I was, being as dry as I was, and continuing to train excessively. My training volume was much too high, and I was able to modify that. Once I got into off season, I was able to modify that, but I mean, that also came with not training for 3 weeks almost going into my last two shows of the season. I couldn't weightlift, I couldn't pose, I couldn't do vacuums. And, it definitely affected my overall look. Um, and I don't say that so much as like my placing. I chose to still do those shows, despite being injured, but it was, yeah, it really impacted my ability to prepare, and it really impacted my mentality going into those shows. However, after the fact, it was like, okay, well, you um, you can't do anything other than just let your body rest, let your body heal. So I I didn't train for a while, for a couple of weeks after my end my season, and it wasn't until maybe 6 weeks post show I started to get a rhythm again with my training. I still wasn't training upper body, um, and I actually hired John Jewett for my weightlifting programming, around this time. And I, explained to him, hey, I suffered this injury during prep. Here's what I think, attributed to it. Here's what I think made it worse. But here's currently what I'm doing with my training split, my exercise selection, my training volume, and my weights. Um, I think I need to restructure this because I think a big part of why I got injured was, yes, being so lean, but also not managing fatigue during prep. And that was something that John helped me with. Um, like, John completely restructured my training. And a big part of it was taking my volume down and making it to where I could actually recover from my workouts. And this is an issue I think a lot of athletes, a lot of bikini athletes fall into is, we're so focused on like, okay, well, like we got to keep things tight. We got to bring the tie-ins in. We got to keep the booty big. We got to keep the delts big. So during a prep, you get excited and you're like, okay, well, like I don't feel super sore. So I'm gonna go in and train whatever today. Oh, I'm just gonna do band work. Oh, I'm just gonna do a quick upper body pump. But the issue is when you're that lean, and especially in bikini, because our because we don't have to get to the body fats that other divisions do. Not only are we able to compete more, just from a annual standpoint, because like physiologically we're able to do it, we also stay in and around that stage condition for longer, and it comes with its own challenges. And I think a big part of why people tend to lose muscle during a prep, or even why people like find they have to they end a season, they're like, okay, now I've got like makeup work to do, now I've got corrections I have to make, even though I have been doing this for a while. Our training is just not optimized. It's not optimized for our goals, and mine certainly wasn't. And John went through. I worked with John for my off season to figure out not only what exercises do I need to be doing to accommodate for the feedback I got after my season, but how can I set myself up for 2022 so that when I get as lean as I need to get, I'm not put in that same position where I suffer an injury that is 100% avoidable.
Yeah. And I know you've been posting a lot on your story about different ways you've been intentional with your training and you're making it really count. And can you expand on what steps you've taken to support you in capitalizing on the training for the results you want, and how that looks different than maybe what a typical bikini competitor training split or approach would look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I think is really important is, my training is structured in a way where if I'm training legs, I am not I have an entire day set aside to recover for that session. So the next time I'm going in to train legs, I'm not my glutes aren't still sore, my hamstrings aren't still sore. And each of those leg days, lower days, for instance, they are structured in a way where my emphasis is growing my glutes. So that means like, hip thrusts are coming first. They're my big compound movement. I'm doing hip thrust 3 days a week. And each day I've got different rep ranges I'm working in. And the overlying factor that I think has made the biggest difference is I actually am lifting now at an RIR of 1, of 2. And if listeners don't know, and RIR is reps in reserve. So the way I like to explain that is if you're lifting at an RIR of 1, that means you have 1 rep left. Whenever you end your set, you maybe could have done 1 more rep while still upholding good form before hitting true technical failure. So what that would look like if you're actually hitting failure on hip thrust, it's not when you have so much of a pump that like it hurts. It's not when it gets like kind of hard. It's when literally when you're coming up from the bottom of a hip thrust, there is a decrease in velocity to a point that like you're almost grinding out a rep. And hip thrusts are an exercise that maybe it's a little more challenging to explain, but like on a squat, on a bench press, you would actually not be able to continue ascending. Like on a squat, you would either hit a sticking point or you would even descend. That would be failure. So you establish what failure is, which that took a while for me to do, even under John's guidance. But his main correction that he gave me that he coached me on and we worked through, he set my training program up initially. And I felt, even though I was following it, when I started working with him, I was hip thrusting, 180 for the prescribed rep range, 10 to 12. The correction was, hey, like your definition of RIR of 1 is different than mine. And we need to get your understanding of this closer to what mine is, because right now your intensity is not where it should be, meaning that you're leaving a lot on the table. Your output is not true failure. And I think this comes from years of seeing different people, talk about like their technical approaches to training and building muscle, but getting that intensity up. For contrast, currently, like for those same workouts, I started at 180 when I was working with John. I'm now at 380. And that's the working weight that I lift at. That's generally what I am doing my hip thrust at. And I've been able not only to build muscle with that, but I've also been able to recover in time for my next session. And I think planning out your training and making sure that like your actual exercise selection, you're not doing 25, 30 sets of workout. You're doing top sets and you're doing them at the appropriate intensity to make those top sets count and be hard enough to where you can't do 8 exercises. You can't do just like sets on sets. And what it really opened my eyes up to is, hey, like I was in the gym for 2 hours before, but I was just putting in work. Like I was just there. I was doing exercises. And even though they felt hard, even though I had a good pump, a pump is not indicative of hypertrophy. And I think that was something that became apparent to me when I started working with John, that a lot of these movements, don't worry about the pump. Like you're going to grow whether you feel like your muscles are going to explode or not. That pump work, it feels good and it's a positive reinforcement. But when it comes to actually building muscle and getting the most out of your movements, you might not find that you get this crazy buildup of lactic acid during the set. You might find like, yeah, your heart rate, like for me, my heart rate jumps to like 160, 170 at the end of a set of hip thrust. And I'm like dying. I'm gulping air like for 3 minutes, like not the entire 3 minutes, but I'm like, I have 3-minute rest breaks before my next set. And then I'm like shoot, like I could take another 2 minutes because like I'm still recovering. And when you find an intensity that when I found that intensity, it was kind of like pulling back the veil, and it was like, oh, this is where I should have been. All of that work I was doing, it was just busy work. It wasn't effective. It wasn't as effective. And, it's kind of amazing. I built the physique I did with such subpar training.
That's really amazing. And I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that and how you're making changes and the reasons behind those changes. What have you noticed in your physique? Like, have you noticed a positive impact in physique, recovery, the way that you're posing, maybe? Like, can you already see a difference?
Yes, yes, I can. My feedback last year was to bring up my glutes, which even though even though I have a solid foundation of muscle, I was using I was having to compensate a lot with my posing in order just to get that look I had on stage. And it was I'm really appreciative. I got to speak with Tyler after my last show, and he said, he's like, you're going to do well pretty much at every show you go to with this package. Like, you're not going to do poorly because you're checking off all the things that we're looking for. You're bringing a very competitive package. But when it comes to excelling in the sport, when it comes to winning a show, when it comes to qualifying at the Olympia for the Olympia, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to lock that in if you're making little errors with your physique, if you're over posing, because these other girls, these top athletes, they're not over posing. And I was finding that to get the look that I had last year, I was having to compensate so much with such a heavy twist in my core. And it was because I don't have a lot of body fat in my core. It's causing a lot of lines to be present. There's a lot of striations, which judges have said, like, hey, that's not the look that we want. It looks a little too imbalanced. It looks too lean there. Versus, like, even in my back pose, I'm having to push really hard because I'm like, well, this is the only way I can get my tie-ins to push through. But it's like what Tyler said. He's like, honestly, I think if you just bring your glutes up, bring them up a little, like, you're going to find you don't have to pose as hard, and you're able to be more relaxed on stage, which ultimately is going to translate to a more competitive package. And um, where I'm at right now, I'm 4 weeks into dieting, and I'm able to see some really positive changes with my physique, but specifically in my glutes, I'm able to see a lot of changes in those upper glutes that I think were really lacking last year. So, I did my check-ins today. I'll probably put up just like a transformation on my story. I do those check-ins usually when I'm once I start to get a little bit leaner. And yeah, I'm really really happy with what I'm seeing and the rate of fat loss.
That's awesome. I think it's important that we hear different approaches to training, like you've shared, and the impact that it makes on an athlete in their journey. And obviously, like, we want to bring up quality and we want to bring what the judges are looking for. And I appreciate you sharing the insight from Tyler as well, of like, to be more competitive, it needs to be more natural, basically, like flawless, not so much forced. And you seem like you feel really confident that that's what you're bringing. But of course, you did do well, like he said, last year, and you're clearly wanting to do better. So what is it that you want to achieve in bodybuilding?
Well, this year I want to qualify for the Olympia. I
Yeah.
want to win a pro show, and I I I think the package I'm bringing is going to be competitive. And you know, ultimately, placing, you can't control what other people bring. And I think I think the right attitude to have, I mean, that the attitude I try to have is to want to compete against the best. Um, so,
Mhm.
when I'm looking at shows, I want to compete. I want to compete with Ashley. I I adore her. She's an extremely competitive athlete.
Mhm.
And not to go off on a tangent, but that was something that, I had mixed like opinions from others, like others close to me and not so close to me. Like, why would you do a show with Ashley? I'm like, because she's Ashley, like she's super
Exactly.
competitive, and like I want to know, where do I stack up against her? Like if I suck compared to her, okay, I got some work to do. Even even placing well next to her, I still got work to do. I don't look like her. And I mean, I think that's like the fun part of the sport. So I would love to compete against a lot of the girls that I look up to that are top Olympians, just to see, okay, like how do how do I do? Because maybe excuse me, maybe this one competitor, um, maybe a Maureen, maybe a Jen Dory, maybe a Laura Lee, maybe they can highlight some areas that I have no idea I need to work on. And I think even regardless of whether an athlete like is an Olympian or whether they're a new pro, I think every time you stand next to another competitor, you are given an opportunity to see what areas are not as strong, what areas that other athlete highlights. And I think that is invaluable. So I mean, for me, I'm excited to stand next to some new bodies, and maybe even some girls I've competed against this past season. But yeah, I mean, I am I'm really excited about what I'm bringing, because I feel like it's going to be a improved package from last year. And the standard for what I want to bring as far as conditioning, I think I can do that. And hopefully I can do that in a way where I can share with others, hey, like, yeah, it's hard. It's like it's extreme, and it's gonna suck, really digging and getting down to those low body fats, but you can do it. And here's how I did it. And
Mhm.
I really look forward to being able to help educate, others in the sport.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. There's a couple of points I want to go back to. You said one, you want to stand next to top Olympians. You want to see how you stack up. I love how you said that anytime you stand next to a competitor, it's going to highlight areas for growth. And that's true of them too. And you did place at Mile High for your pro debut second to Ashley K, which is huge. And I think that really like established that lens on you that I mentioned earlier. So you have done it. What did she highlight at that point in time that you then focused on, or maybe are, have focused on since?
So at the Mile High, there were some things with my posing that became really apparent, standing next to Ashley and Jimmy, and the other athletes. But I would say the big takeaways were my back pose. I really gotta lock out my knees, and that that probably sounds very obvious. But listeners are probably like, yeah, I've heard that from every single pro, or don't be squatty, don't bend. So the issue comes with like, I Shane and I, we coordinated after junior USAs. We did like a little, or I said, yeah, we coordinated after junior USAs, and we're like, okay, you're standing so tall and you got so much of an arch. You don't need to stand so tall. You can bend a little bit. You can go a little wider with your stance, because there was some shots we looked at. I was pretty narrow, and I look at Mile High and I'm like, oh, well, overcorrected little too much in the other direction, but that's okay. I mean, now you move it back, you move it back the other way. But I felt like, in the back pose, I need to, even though it feels like even a slight bend is like very subtle, I don't think it's I don't think it's as subtle as it feels, maybe. So I do need to stand a lot taller. And my torso is relatively short compared to my lower body. So that's going to also be something I want to consider in my back pose, is rather than as much as like I might want to arch, and every every degree that I do that is going to shorten my torso even more, which is going to create a very imbalanced look from top to bottom. So that might be something I need to prepare for. So, even in my poses now, I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense when I'm practicing posing to practice it wrong. So even though I might not be able to see as much detail, even at a higher body fat, I still need to practice that adjusted pose. And even on my front pose, I have the flexibility to twist very heavily, but because I'm, because I don't carry as much muscle as Ashley, I tend to look smaller. And then the more I twist, I look even smaller. So that was a piece of feedback I got from the judges there too. Hey, like you're you have a small enough waist where you can stand a little more straight on if you have that condition, but you need to pose according to how the people around you are posing, or not just posing, how they're also built. And Ashley she is very, very dense, and even though we're very similar in heights, I think we're just like an inch or two difference. Not two, probably half an inch. If I pose too, like, I don't know, too rigid, it's highlighted because her posing is very refined. And I mean, her front pose is very strong, and her ratios are wild. So that's an instance. If I were to compete against her, I would need to, I don't know, kind of look at, okay, like how do I look in comparison, and what are ways I potentially could look worse, and what are ways I could look better with certain posing adjustments. And I don't know, I find that part of the sport I find to be really fascinating, because I mean, there are so many different bodies getting on stage, and you don't know how someone's going to look. You don't know the conditioning they're going to bring. And once you're on stage, I mean, like, you're kind of left with like, well, like, I can bring my best, but if you're much shorter, if you're much denser, if you're not as dense, I mean, like, this can look in comparison very different from the judges' perspectives.
Yes, that is a really, really important and good point. And I like how you were able to recognize those little things can go a long way. And personally, I really resonate when you said that you overcorrected. I feel like I did that going into USA's. Like, I made these changes that were just so unnecessary. And I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? Like, I literally don't think that was so unnecessary and like hurt me more than it helped me. And it's great though, because it was a learning experience. But it's important as athletes that we can remain aware of the things that need to improve and not just settle either, because a lot of people I think would look at what you brought last year and be like, wow, she killed it, she could just take like an improvement season as she always does, train as she always has, and come back and do really well, which is probably true. But you looked at it more objectively, and you took Tyler's feedback as well, and you talked to these different professionals, and you've made changes that are going to elevate you probably even beyond um, previous expectations or others' expectations too. And your plan is to coach yourself, which I think is, with of course the second pair of eyes, but when you go about this prep yourself, how will you know it's time to pump the brakes or step back? Because you had to do that after your last pro show. You had to step back, and I'm wondering how you knew it was time to do it then, and how you're going to pay attention to that when you're prepping yourself now.
That's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked that. Because I think that's something that I wouldn't have known how to answer the beginning of last year. If someone was like, okay, but what's like too far, I wouldn't have been able to give a firm answer. And I think now I can. So I think there are two aspects. I think first you need to have objective metrics to determine that what is too far for you. You've got the food side of things, you've got the diet, you got the nutrition. I didn't have any problems adhering during last year's prep despite how low I got, despite how aggressive I was, how big of a deficit I was in, my adherence, like I can say I take a lot of pride in this because I think it's so important. I think it moves the needle the most when it comes to fat loss. My adherence was spot on, and I didn't start to have issues with adherence until after the mile high. And I think a large part of it was because we didn't bring calories up. I had 5 weeks in between Mile High and then the next show I was going to do. And I'm not exactly sure why, but it was never a call that was made. And it started to become an issue for me. And I started to realize, okay, well, I'm having not just like a little more food focus, a little, I mean, granted, yes, I was hungry. So when I say like adherence, I don't mean it was like a breeze. It wasn't.
Right.
But when there's an actual challenge in adhering and a lack of an ability, to be present and to tell yourself like, no, you need to stay focused on your goal, and you need to decide if this is worth it right now to go off diet or not. And I want to be clear because I realize I'm being pretty vague. It was like a week after the Mile High where I was like, I wanted to like I started they're not even rice cakes. They're like the shitty version of rice cakes that are like 10 calories, like the little like basically cardboard frisbee ones. If you know what I'm talking about, like they're a prep hack, sure, but they're not good. And they're like 10 calories, but I remember one night I ate like four of them, and I was like, I told Patrick, I was like, yeah, this is not good. I need to talk to Shane about this because like that's not something that would have happened. Oh gosh, I just heard how I said that. I know I probably sound really disordered. So hopefully listeners can be forgiving. But I remember telling Patrick, I'm like, this hasn't even been like remotely an issue the entire prep. And this
Yes.
is kind of weird. This is not where I should be with food right now. And even though I have 5 weeks, like we didn't plan, like Shane didn't give me high days. There were no cheat meals the entirety of prep by my choice, but like also makes it keeps things, a little tighter. So when I told Shane about that, I was like, yeah, hey, I'm sorry. I know I was supposed to be back on track. Like it was like the Monday after the show or Tuesday. It was right after. I was like, I'm kind of having an issue with adherence. And granted, I don't even think I told him what I ate, but I was like, that to me is like a big enough red flag because the fact that I wasn't able to I didn't feel like I was in control of like what I was eating. And I was like, man, I probably need to nip this in the bud sooner than later. So he raised calories by like 200. So I went from like 1100 to like 13 or 1400, something like that. And I remember I started becoming really food focused after that point because I was like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't know why. I think I'm at the condition I need to be. I don't know why I'm in still such a massive deficit, and
Mm.
I'm still doing. I think I was doing an hour of cardio. I think we dropped it down from 90, but I was like, it still doesn't make a lot of sense. And I started to notice like I became really really obsessive with then my food choices, and like I would eat a meal and then I'd be like, okay, like I don't I feel like no satisfaction from that. And yeah, I mean, this was a lot of these conversations happened with Patrick, which I really have to give him like, gosh, I people don't realize how much he did for me this last year or even this year. Just even I specifically want to I'm talking about the mental side of managing food and managing how I view food and like the challenges I had, during prep and post show. But I, would have these conversations with them. I'd be like, hey, like, I'm noticing like my food focus is going up. Like it's like in that 8, 9 range. And like I'm starting to make like folders on my phone with like Instagram pictures and like I wasn't like that for like 4 months straight. So I was like, it's not even like up to me to judge whether it's right, wrong. It's actually really normal to have your ghrelin elevated like that and to be a little more obsessive. But I started to recognize I didn't like how that felt. So for me, that's a really, really distinct metric to use this season is, you know, when I get to the point where I start to feel like, hey, maybe how I'm looking at food is not as healthy as I want it to be. Um, that's really important that I don't go too far in the other direction. I think last year I went a little too far in the wrong direction. And that that I think is really important. I think your training, I think that's another metric to take into account that I plan to take into account this year. I mean, you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think that's an area that a lot of people neglect when it comes to controlling variables during a prep. So I've always tracked my training volume. I've always tracked my training. I mean, I've got like 10 years of training and it's like it's really probably unnecessary, but I mean, it's just how I've always done things. And this year, after working with John, I was able to see, okay, well, this is an appropriate amount of training volume per session per week. And I've got so much data collected from my off season and now the beginning of prep to know, okay, well, here's what's an acceptable amount of fatigue to experience. Here is what I need to manage that fatigue. The leaner you get, the harder it's going to be to manage that. But there is a certain point where if you're not, like, if you're consistently not recovering and you're consistently on low calories and then your output is decreased, you're going to find your fat loss is going to stall anyway. So before you get to that point, if you're able to intervene and implement some tools that will maybe provide more runway, runway meaning like the length of time, the longevity you have in a season. There are tools you can use that you can implement during a prep, either in the forms of controlled refeeds, possible diet breaks. And I think that's something to monitor. The way I plan to manage that is by around the 10-12 week mark. I'm planning to take a diet break. Maybe I don't. Maybe I get to that point and I'm like, I actually don't need it. Or hey, maybe not a full diet break. Maybe that week I just lower two, take off two of my top sets from my main movements. Having a plan though factors in for a week of not being in a deficit. And I think that right there, that already like sets me up for success because I don't have to be going into week 10 and be like, well, I'm behind with my fat loss because I haven't been hitting it. And now I don't have time for this diet break to make this specific show. So ultimately I'm just gonna have to push harder even if I'm not recovering. Yeah, I don't want to do that this year. And I hopefully won't have to. But yeah, I think I think the strategy just comes from having that timeline and every week being like, okay, well, how close were we to your goals? And the less we have to force the deficit, the less aggressive we have to get towards the tail end, the better off your body is going to be, even from a fatigue standpoint.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you reflected on the past and you're sharing how you can go about that in the future. And I love your point about making sure there's objective perspectives to this too. And having that experience with food after so much adherence really speaks to a lot of the biological changes we have and how that can impact us on a behavioral standpoint, of course. And it's important to learn from that and reflect and see, well, what do I need to do next time so that it doesn't happen that way, or that I can be prepared for it if it were to start going in that direction. And it sounds like that's something you've been able to really set yourself up for. And um, one of our listeners did want to know, and I think you've covered this, but I want to ask outright, just in case there's something specific you would say to them. They wanted to know if there's one thing you wish you didn't do during a prep that you would tell your past and future self not to do. And if so, what would that be?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, all right. So I would say I would say last year's prep, if I could tell myself something that I think would have made a significant impact, um, I would tell myself not to do those last two pro shows after I got injured. And I think I think that's a really critical piece of advice I didn't have at the time, but I actually have given to a friend of mine who ironically suffered the same injury, and it was right before she did her pro debut a week before, and she had another show planned, and I told her I would not get on stage because the specifics of that injury made it really, really difficult to suck in and to hold your stomach in. And granted, I understand like people like can look at pictures and be like, oh, like her waist isn't that much bigger. But I see it and I see the lack of control I had. And quite honestly, I would have like I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got on stage. And I kind of told Shane, I just said, I really want to do these shows. I know that, and and at no point did he try to talk me out of them, but I just said, I think I will be able to live with getting on stage, and I think I'll have less regret versus if I quit and say like, hey, I can't do these shows and tell the promoters and try to rescind my contract. I Not only do I think the promoters would have understood, I know Shane would have understood. I know Patrick, he would have been like, yes, like this is exactly what you need to do. Um, just to paint a picture, a week before the Patriots challenge, that was the my second pro show last season. I was waking up in the morning, and I was not able to check in. Like I was trying to hit poses. I couldn't I couldn't control my stomach. I couldn't suck in even like I just couldn't bring my stomach in because any expansion of my rib cage pulled on my serratus and caused an immense amount of pain. So when this injury first happened, I was still at 1100 calories and I was doing my cardio with like ice packs in my sports bra. Like I looked like an ice pack, like I looked like a Unabomber. Like I had them like wrapped around the entirety of my body. I was I was wearing ice packs 24 hours a day. I was waking up in the middle of the night to change them out because there was so much inflammation and so much pain around the that right side of my rib. And posing was impossible. Like I mean, I at first I tried to pose through it and Shane was very clear. He's like, please don't make this worse. And him knowing I'm stubborn, I'm like, okay, well, like I cannot train, sure. I can't not do cardio. But after the mile high, I felt so good coming off the mile high. Once I got injured, that was like a week or 2 weeks afterwards. I I I felt so defeated every single day because I was eating 900 calories, 1,000 calories, and doing 2 hours of cardio, and my weight was going up, and my stomach, which is an area that I've never really stored a ton of body fat in, my stomach was looking shittier and shittier every single day. And I was having like just pounds of fluid on like one side of my body, just inflammation, just from where, around my injury. And it was like a week before, I just like I woke up and like every day Patrick's like, I have no idea. Like he did so well just trying to like just keep me from just like losing my mind. But every single day he was like, I would wake up and like within an hour, I'd be like, I can't even stand. Like I need new ice packs, and like I'd be in tears because I'm like, I don't want to get on stage. I do not want to do this, but I feel like I can't quit. I can't pull out because whatever it doesn't plug in whatever reason X, Y, and Z of the time why I thought I couldn't. And the day before the show, I mean, I felt so defeated, and I felt so embarrassed because I'm like, this is not how I want to do this. Like, and I feel like I have no options. I feel like I have no ability to like to turn back time and decide 2 weeks ago, hey, like you can't get on stage. And I I'm glad I did, because now I know that I never want to feel like that again. And I know that it's completely avoidable. And at the time, like I was like, I don't want to give up. I don't know how I'll feel. Like I might feel like a quitter if I just decide I said I was going to do this and now I don't do it. Um, the girl I gave this advice to didn't do her next show. And I'm glad she didn't, because her physique is amazing and she looked incredible at her pro debut. But like, she's going to compete. She's going to be an Olympian. She is one of the most competitive physiques in the IFBB. I mean, as far as like new pros go, like, yeah. But she told me afterwards, she was like, I'm so glad. I'm so glad, like, you told me. I'm so glad you shared your experience and how like difficult that was to go for 2 weeks straight and do back-to-back shows, knowing that like, no, it's not your best. You're standing, on a stage exposed, and like after so much time you spent dieting to work hard, knowing that like you're turning in a C- paper. Like, sure, it's passable, but like, I know it probably sounds like I'm being really hard on myself, but like, I know how much better I looked before I got injured. I know how focused I was. And I don't think those last two shows, all I could focus on was like, hey, you just have to land the plane. Like, you just have to see it through and it'll all be over really soon. And then you get to be as upset as you want to be and as, pissed off. But like, no, you don't, no amount of like frustration change it. Like, I just kept telling myself, like, no matter how frustrated I am, going to get my tan, going to get my makeup done the day of the show, like, you're getting on stage, you gotta perform. And like, I I really wish I had not. Like, I wish I had just been like, no, no, I don't. I actually don't have to. Like, I can just cancel and I can just say I'm injured, because that's completely reasonable. And there are a lot of girls I've spoken with, like, they'll go into a national show and they're telling me, and I'm like, I felt exactly that. And I think more people need to decide, hey, you know what? The stage is always going to be there. I do not have to get on stage until this is going to be my best package, until I can feel confident that what I'm bringing is good enough for me. And yeah, that would be the advice I would give.
That's amazing. And I'm really glad that you said that. And actually, I usually wrap up the episode by asking for advice. So I was hoping you might be able to share more, kind of expanding. And if that is your best advice, of course, that's fine too, because it's amazing, just like everything you've shared from your experience and the journey you've had. And I think it's just like I said earlier, it's perspective. And before I ask you for your best advice, I did want to just know, why did you keep going? Was it because you felt like you couldn't pull out your contracts, or was it because you wanted to prove something to yourself? Like, what was it that made you continue to go through that?
I don't, at the time, I didn't know if I gave up. I was afraid that that would be the first step in developing that as a pattern. Like, I didn't want that to become something I did. And I wasn't, if I decided, hey, I can't compete in the Vegas show, I can't compete in the Austin show right after. And that was like how I was looking at it, is you're not quitting just once, you're quitting twice. And like, you can either way, you can either experience this and know that it's going to suck and it is not going to be ideal, and maybe you find some strength in going through it. But I couldn't convince myself that I was going to find strength if I pulled out. And looking back, I'm again, like, I'm glad I did those shows. I'm glad I got the stage time. No show will ever be as hard as those were. They'll never be as negative, or I'll never feel as bad as I did, like on show day or going into those shows. But I also will never put myself through that again, because I mean, oh, it sounds so cheesy, but like, I love myself way too much to put myself
Mhm.
through that, because that was not, it was helpful, but I don't think I need to do it again. I don't think I need to learn that lesson twice.
Yeah.
But it just, I couldn't rationalize, like, well, if I pull out, what are the pros? Yes, like, I can heal, but is that enough to outweigh knowing that, like, I said I was going to do something and I didn't do it? And I guess, like, I was really afraid, what if I do this, and what if that becomes a thing? What if I start another prep next year and then I experience these same emotions?
Mm.
What if I say, well, oh, this is not the right time, or I don't look good enough. So I said I was going to do this show, but I'm not going to. And I just, I don't know. I take those promises to myself really,
Mhm.
really really seriously. And yeah, I know now I'm not committing to shows until like the week before, the 2 weeks before. I mean, like, I'll be ready, but I'm not gonna, until I know, hey, I'm healthy and I am at the, I have the look that I'm going to bring to stage, and I'm proud of it. And I feel comfortable with it. There won't be a, hey, like, I'm 3 weeks out from this show. It's like, no, I'm gonna get in shape, and then I'll have a target of an idea of shows, but
Mhm.
I'm not gonna do that to myself again. Yeah.
Totally. Another great example of like learning from your past and being willing to make those changes. So, I would like to hear your best advice for people who have never competed before but would like to, and then your best advice for competitors on their road to pro.
Okay. Okay. So best advice, and I guess it falls kind of under both umbrellas, but I
Okay.
mean this more directed for general audience, maybe who hasn't gotten on stage and never has a desire to. Um, there is an immense amount of information online that you have access to, that is most of which is free. And there are so many resources you can look to for educators in the space to take yourself to put yourself in a position where you have the tools needed to take control of your body composition. And growing up, that was never something I felt like I could do. I never felt like, okay, like, I'm going to have total control over how I look at 20, at 25, at 30, at 40. And once I educated myself, once I sought out those resources, I was able to develop this confidence in my own ability to manage my diet, my nutrition, no matter the goal. And I think doing so, I think every person deserves to wake up every day and know, hey, regardless of how you look right now in time, you have control over that and you can take control over it. And you do not have to follow a fad diet. You do not have to disassociate with enjoying food. You don't have to starve yourself. There are ways to go about it that are healthy and sustainable. And I promise any person who is telling you the opposite, I'm going to choose to look at it as ignorance, that they don't know any better. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not. But I, my advice is to encourage people to find that education. Be that resource that you're looking to or you're looking for. Be, become educated around, general principles of fat loss and muscle hypertrophy and training principles, because I promise you it's not as flashy and sexy as people in the industry want you to believe. And when you have those tools, like when you just live your life and like when someone's like telling you something that's not true about how to diet, how to get in shape, it makes things a lot easier when you don't have to rely on Instagram or social media to find your answers, and you can just be like, no, that's not what the science says. That's not how the body works. And yeah, I think the industry as a whole, I think our standards would be raised if as more people become more educated and yeah, just demand more from others,
That's great
as
advice.
far I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's
Thank you.
just great advice. You're welcome.
As far as competitors, the best advice I can give, the main takeaway I want to provide is more than anything, if you are someone, if you are struggling with what I have struggled with the majority of my competitive career, if you struggle with conditioning and that's something you believe you cannot achieve, you cannot attain, please listen to me. You can. You 100,000% can. I have the most stubborn legs and glutes as body fat goes, and those things take forever to come down. And I believed for a long time I would never see my tie-ins. I didn't even know what my tie-ins were before before 2021. Like I just didn't know they existed this way. Like I didn't know what they looked like or what they could look like. Everything that I've said about like how I dieted last year, just take that for what it is. But there is not a secret. There's not a coach who has a secret plan or a more elite plan. I promise you, it just comes down to diet and training. And sorry, I say diet and training. What I mean is diet and cardio. And if what you're doing, if you're at an hour and a half of cardio and you're at 1,100 calories, like I was, you might have to be there for longer than you think you should be there. You might have to sit in that deficit for a while and throw the numbers out. If you lose enough body fat, if you can take yourself there, you can figure out, okay, what's underneath that body fat. And if it's not something that you've ever seen, you might be like, okay, well, I don't know how long I can do this. I only want to do this for 2 weeks. It might take 4 weeks, it might take 6 weeks, it might take time off stage in order to get yourself in a position where maybe the amount of fat you need to lose is more acceptable. And I promise, if someone is telling you like you have like thick skin or you just like it's just not going to happen for you, or you are only going to achieve this look through, supplementation. Like, it's bullshit. Like, it really is. It's, I'm going to say it's ignorance again, because it's how I want to look at it. But like, it does come down to lowering calories, increasing cardio, and doing it for long enough to where you can get to that body fat. But yeah, I hope that's helpful for listeners. I didn't believe I could achieve the conditioning that I did this past year, and I'm really glad now. I know for a fact, undeniably I can achieve that, and I know there's no secret peak week protocol. There's no secret ratio of carbs to fats, or only eating white fish for 8 weeks. It's nothing like that. It's literally just calories in and calories out.
Very helpful, Cory. I do appreciate just everything you've shared and being so open about your journey, your experiences, the evolution of your perspectives. I think it's very relatable to others, and also insightful in that it's okay to take the time necessary and really reflect on your journey as you go, as well as after each step. And I want everybody to be able to connect with you or follow you if they're not already, and maybe even inquire about working with you. So can you let everybody know how they can do that?
Yes, I am on Instagram at Cory_fit. That's CORY_FIT.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to put that in the show notes. So everybody listening, that's always on celestial.fit/podcast. If you're listening right away, it'll be at the top of the page. If you're listening in the future, just scroll down to the category section. It's alphabetized, so find Cory's name, and then you'll see there not just the links and the resources, but also full episode notes, timestamps, and summary of topics covered. So you can always go back and see what was discussed in this episode. What do I want to go back to, and when was it shared? So that way you can re-listen to those parts that you really appreciated or you want to hear again, and or share it with people and let them know what it was about. So thank you guys for tuning in again to another episode. And Cory, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this.
Yes, me too. You're so welcome. And to everybody listening, hope you have an amazing rest of your day, night, or morning, wherever you are in the world while you're listening to this episode.